In the summer of 1995, my parents and I were at my uncle's house for a family barbecue. My parents were in the market for a new home and saw a for sale sign in front of a white brick house 2 doors down from my uncle's. From the moment we toured it, I felt uneasy. Maybe it was the fact that the family was selling it because their daughter had been admitted to the psych ward for trying to commit suicide. Maybe it was the fact that the daughter's baby had mysteriously died in the house. I was only 10 or so, of course. My parents didn't listen to my protests, and by the end of the summer, we were living there. And things were only okay in the beginning. However, things started happening. My room, coincidentally the same one the baby died and the daughter tried to kill herself in, would suddenly become ice cold. The radio stations on my stereo would change, CDs would randomly eject or play, the TV would turn on or flip channels, and it was centralized to my room. Light bulbs will burst, not just die, but shatter. We had numerous electricians check the house out, only to say everything was fine. Outside, the pecan trees produced rotten pecans. There were only poisonous snakes around our house, never our neighbours. The same went for spiders, and they would chase you. Random things would disappear over the years. Jars of mayonnaise, keys. One night during dinner, my parents and I witnessed a spoon rotating on the counter numerous times. Still, all of this was fairly harmless until I turned 17. Nearby construction was started for an on-ramp to the interstate. Part of the neighborhood was sacrificed for it. I should state that the entire place used to be owned by one man and farmland until the 60s. In any event, things ramped up. Doors would slam. We heard disembodied voices. I felt like things were watching me at night, and I started to feel insanely depressed. My friend moved in with us that year. Things got worse. Things would move in a room. We would fight constantly. My father was always angry and acted out of character. I felt suicidal. I know I had horrible fights with my mother, but to this day, I can't remember what I said. And she has told me that during these fights, I didn't look right. My brown eyes looked black, my skin looked drawn. One night, I woke up to my mum's service dog growling and standing in my doorway. This dog had only growled once, and that was at another dog that tried to attack us on a walk. It freaked me out. I heard a bang, threw the blankets over my head and hid. I finally slept. That morning, I found my golden cross necklace, bent and in the opposite corner of the room. It had chipped some of the paint off the wall from hitting so hard. It was what I heard the night prior. I finally left the house to go to college. In those days, I would be fine unless I came home. I felt angry and suicidal the minute I'd walk in the house. We had horrible luck. On the way home to the house, I was in a rollover wreck. It felt like something had hit the car and pushed it off the road. My mom was diagnosed with lupus and fibromyalgia. I constantly was angry. Friends hated coming to the house. It felt so uncomfortable. There were horrible odors when I'd come home as well, and I always felt like I was being watched. My father was diagnosed with lymphoma. It was a bad case. I talked to the friend who knew a few of the previous occupants. A lot of them had suffered from similar cancers. During treatment, my parents invited a former pastor over. His remarks before leaving the house was to leave as soon as possible, and he refused to return. My parents put the house on the market. The last day I was there, before we left, there was an old smoke detector that came with the house. It had hung on the wall forever without batteries because we had newer detectors. It randomly started going off. We left it blaring in the kitchen as we backed out. Dad and I both saw a black figure staring back. At our new house, our pets were happier. Dad's cancer went into remission, but still, something was attached to me. There were instances of being forcefully held down by something, with bruises that looked like handprints. I would get angry if my dad listened to Christian music. I refused to go to church. When I did, I felt incredibly sick. At school, I was suffering. I had huge arguments. I wouldn't remember what I said, but like my mother, described my parents as not being right, and described my voice as sounding different. When I came home that Christmas, I wouldn't even listen to Christmas music. It gave me migraines. You should probably understand that since my birthday is before Christmas, Christmas has always been one of my favourite times. My dad was worried about me. Eventually, after lots of praying and use of holy water, it stopped. Things were lighter. And then former neighbours started telling us about the house. New occupants would last about a year. Some suffered tragic deaths. There was a suicide, another cancer, a kid died. My parents finally told me that more than a few occupants before us had developed blood-borne cancers or died by suicide. So, when a friend posted an article of the house burning down last night on Facebook, it felt eerie. But it wasn't surprising that this was the end result. I feel that it couldn't have happened any other way. There's something horrible in that house. It caused the things I mentioned and so many other experiences I suffered through that can't be mentioned in just one post. I'm just glad no one was hurt. A friend who was a few years older told me this story one summer, and I was blown away. I believed it happened because she's a very practical, non-religious person who even questions the events that happen in this house from time to time. Hopefully this doesn't end up being too long, but I promise it's worth the read. Kate, my friend, moved into off-campus housing in Ohio University earlier in the summer than most students. Thus, she was all alone, with only her dog to keep her company for the first few weeks. Right after she moved in, small things of hers would either go missing or move to odd places in rooms. She initially chalked it up to her being drunk a lot since she was bored over the summer and had nothing else to do. She thought she must be moving things when she drank and didn't think much of it. The only odd thing she noticed towards the beginning was a dog consistently barking at seemingly nothing. Again, she didn't think too much of it to begin with. Her first indication that something weird was going on was when she found one of her bracelets shoved in a pillowcase one night. She knew that no matter what, drunk or sober, she would not have put the bracelet there. It was the one her mom had given her years ago, and she wasn't very fond of it. In fact, she didn't realize she had brought it with her to go to college until she found it in the pillowcase. At this point, she started feeling a little uncomfortable with the things moving around the house, but ignored it for the most part. The night that things came to a head, she was getting in the shower, which was located in the basement of the house. As she was getting in, she took a magnetic butterfly clip out of her hair and stuck it to the bottom right corner of the mirror. After she was done, she stepped out and looked at the mirror. The butterfly clip had moved from the bottom right-hand corner to the top left, and you could see the streak mark in the fogged-up mirror as though someone had dragged it across the mirror without picking it up. Of course, at this point, she's freaking out, so she calls her mom to tell her what happened. She grabs her phone and towel and heads from the basement, through the kitchen, up to her room on the second floor to change clothes, all while on the phone. As she was heading back downstairs to grab the rest of her things from the basement, she backs through the kitchen and every single pantry door and drawer has been opened in the minute or two that she was out of the room. She freaks out, grabs the dog, and decides to stay at a friend's place for a few days. She stays at a friend's place for a few days until the landlord kicks her out for having a dog. She decides to head back to the house because she knows someone is going to sublet one of the rooms for the remaining 2 months of the summer until her friends come back for school. She doesn't know the guy, but she knows she will feel more comfortable with another person in the house. When she gets there, she warns him about the weird things that go on, but he doesn't really believe her. She soon finds out that he is kind of crazy. He likes to do a lot of drugs and drink a lot, which makes her feel uncomfortable, but she doesn't say much. There is still an odd feeling to the house, and doors would randomly unlock or lock and open up when no one was there. But Kate decides that whatever is in the house isn't malevolent. She would talk to the ghost to make sure that he or she knew she wasn't there to cause trouble, and it seemed to help for the most part. Even with all the things moving all the time, she never felt threatened. The only thing that frightened her was the kitchen chair. Whenever Kate would leave the house for an extended period of time, a specific kitchen chair would always move around the first floor in odd places and positions. She would find it tipped over, upside down, on top of the table, etc. And every time this happened, she knew it was something evil. One day, she came home, opened the door, and the chair was directly in front of the doorway. She felt so much that someone was sitting in it and staring at her that she closed the door and entered through the back before moving the chair back to the kitchen. At this point, the guy that was subletting the room was still living in the house, but Kate was growing to dislike him even more. One night, they had both been drinking and fell asleep on the living room couches. She wakes up late at night to the guy, let's call him Steve because I can't remember his name, stomping around the house yelling. She follows him upstairs and he's trying to get to the attic, yelling about the voices that won't stop talking to him. She's freaked out but can't hear a thing, and he's more mad than anything about his erratic behaviour, so she yells at him to get the F out or she will call the landlord because she is sick of his behaviour. He leaves that night, only taking a few of his things and leaving the majority of his possessions in the room he was staying in. About a month after Steve left, he still hasn't picked up any of his stuff, and Katie's worried that he won't come back to get it before her friends move back into the house. One night, she's dead asleep when she wakes up to what she thought was a pounding on her bedroom door. As she sits there, terrified, she realizes that the sound is coming from every single door in the house, as though multiple people are slamming their fists into the doors in unison. Her dog is going crazy, so she finally opens the door and the noise stops. Predictably, no one is there, and as she looks around, every single door, except the front and back, has been opened, even though they were all closed before she went to bed. As she is standing on top of the stairs, there is a knock at only the front door, and then a yell. Steve had come back to get his stuff, 1 month later, at 2 in the morning. Looking back, Kate thinks it was the ghost trying to warn her because it knew that she wasn't fond of Steve. She lets him in, and he goes upstairs to get his stuff and starts throwing a fit. She goes in after him and he asks why she moved his stuff. Every single item in his room was in a pile in the middle of the floor, including the furniture, most of which had been up against the wall, was shoved as much towards the middle as possible. Kate hadn't been in there since the day he left. A lot of other weird stuff happened, but the only 2 other instances that she told me about happened after her friends moved back in the house. One morning, her roommate was walking down the stairs and glanced into the living room to see a man hanging from the rafters of the ceiling. They lived in a very old house, which had barely been remodeled. She screamed, and then he disappeared. When Kate went back to her parents for Christmas, they decided to play with a Ouija board to ask the ghost questions. When Kate jokingly asked if he watched her in the shower, the creepy answer was yes. I'm sure there are a bunch of other stories about when she lived in the house, but those are just the parts that she told me. Sorry if it ended up being really long, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. I was just talking about this in the comments of a different thread, so I figured I would post about it. I grew up in an extremely haunted house in Texas. My parents still live there. Lots of really weird, unexplainable things happened there, but this one thing scared me the most. One day when I was 18, I was getting prepared for my first job interview at Walmart. This happened the day before the interview, but I was still picking my clothes out and whatnot. I ended up waking up around 6 AM that day. I did my usual shower, eat and get dressed. Nothing out of the ordinary. That is, until I looked in my big unicorn mirror. Let me describe this mirror. It's pretty big with snow white vines around the edges and a medium-sized unicorn off to the side, the same colour as the vines. My mum had had the mirror since she was little and eventually gave it to me. Anyway, I looked into the mirror after getting dressed and I see this faint demon face. Basically, a semi-fleshed skeleton head with pieces of flesh hanging off and deep red eyes. I freaked out and screamed, of course. I run around turning all the lights on in the house, and I'm repeatedly saying, "Go away." 9 times out of 10, that worked. I grab a Bible for protection because, obviously, this thing is not good. As I sit down on my bed and look up, I freaking see this skeleton Satan demon thing lean around my door. I still vividly remember seeing its decaying hand reach around my doorframe. And off I go, screaming again, which wakes up everyone in the house. I told my mom and my grandma about it. They gave me a few crosses and told me to keep the Bible open at all times. I didn't sleep with the light off for at least a week after that, and I shook all day long after seeing the decaying flesh monster with red eyes. I'd never seen a demon before until then, but I'll never forget the feeling of utter terror it gave me. Yes, I had tried to get rid of that freaking mirror way before I ever saw the face in it because I swear that thing is like an invitation for ghosts or something. If I took it down from its spot on the wall, I would usually have things get tossed off my walls. My stuff would magically break. Things like that. Needless to say, I left it on the wall. My mom won't even take it down because it seems to annoy something in that house. I think this is my first, possibly only, thread on here. I might as well get it out of my system. I grew up in a house that I think was haunted, but honestly, I can't tell you why. The house wasn't built over a graveyard, just an old cattle ranch that would have spanned the lower quarter of the town I grew up in. Trust me, I've looked up historical records trying to find an answer. The worst I've got is that it was A, an orphanage at one time, possibly between the 40s and 60s, and B, before it was bulldozed for the new housing tract my house is a part of, it was a hideout for Capitol Records celebrities in the 70s. I live in the US, and nearby an area that the Native Americans would have inhabited. In fact, part of the area name comes from the fact that we have tons of water in a desert and references this odd bit of habitation. Still, no Indian burial grounds. It was also pretty open. Walk forward a foot from the front door and you could see the living room, through the kitchen, and just about everything in either of them. There were still walls with archways that would softify the rooms, if you will, but you could see above the kitchen counter and under the cupboards to the living room, and the other end just emptied into the living room anyways. Straight ahead, would have been the hallway leading to the bedrooms and bathroom. To the left would have been the dining room, the family room when I was a kid. You could basically see the family room from the living room, and it terrified me for some reason. It always looked/felt black at night, kind of evil, but felt fine during the day. So, here's the story. There are many incidents like this. I'd hear little random voices whenever I was alone, or only my older sibling was there. They'd be in strange languages. If they were a foreign language, they were Indo-European, as studying the IE language is a hobby of mine, and even back then, I would have had the knowledge to hear IE influence. They would also have odd acoustics, like echoes or muffling that didn't match the room in the house I heard them in. This included a time where I was home alone, sitting in front of my computer, and heard a couple bickering in the kitchen. It was only a brief second, but it was enough to make me wonder what the heck it was. Another, I was alone with my sibling, sitting there and toying with Audacity for some forsaken reason. Parents are gone for the night, we're watching the house, you know the drill. As I'm recording myself singing, I hear a faint voice from the family room and the other end of the house. It's like a child saying no or don't. And I stopped my nonsense right there, clipped the voice from the audio, and sent the clip to a few of my friends. I still have it to this day. Again, keep in mind, I heard it, so it wasn't an EVP, but it was one of those random voice hauntings, and the only one I caught on tape, so to speak. Then, the biggie. I have an older sibling. We used to sneak out at night and listen to the radio in the living room, though this night, it was Sirius, and the graveyard station. We'd sit, talk about our days, shoot the breeze, whatever have you. Well, we're doing what we did every night. Fade to black is just fading into silence, when we hear this weird chanting. It was very modulated, controlled, shout, chanting over and over, in a language we couldn't identify. We looked at each other, and we just started asking each other, "Did you hear that? What is that? Who's going to tell Mom?" in excitement. We look over, and on the couch is our cat, who wouldn't move to save his life from a burning building, but was standing straight up, staring in the direction of the hallway. My other cat, who was laying on my bed in my room at the end of the hallway, came skittering out and joined us. Keep in mind, my parents' bedroom is right across the hall from mine, and thus at the end too. So I chose to go. I'm either brave or stupid, depends on who you ask, and started walking down the hallway to wake Mom up and let her know what was going on. I walked through it, and I hear it starting to turn around and follow me. At this point, I heard a distinct heel-toe click, like when you're wearing tap shoes or steel-toe boots. With each step, I hear a wooden rattle, like they were wearing an anklet on their legs. The sound also sounded like it was in a large room with hardwood floors, not the small, rectangular hallway with the fake wood we had. Each step is distinct, planned, like it noticed me and decided to walk my way, carefully, slowly, but with rhythm. It had since stopped chanting once it noticed me. I do what every good young adult does and hide behind my door until the sound goes away. After it did, I then go to wake up my mom and tell her what happened. She believes me, and I tell her my story first, everything from the chanting to the stalking. Mom then asks my sibling, who was still hanging out in the living room. She told the same story, except she says the sound went quiet around the same time I heard it follow me. She says she heard nothing else after the chanting. Again, this wasn't a song playing on the metal station. We muted it after we heard the chanting started. Again, it seems to have been intelligent, as it chose to follow me right as I passed the sound source. And again, I'm a very silly person.